Welcome to Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host and CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events, Matt Kleinrock. We have a cool episode today, and I have Travis Stanton, who is the editor-in-chief at EXHIBITOR Magazine, with me today. If you don't know EXHIBITOR Magazine, they are the best way to describe it is be like best practices in trade show and event marketing. They're a media group. They put out some incredible content, expert on education for trade show, corporate marketing, event marketing. They do a great job. Travis, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great opportunity to chat a bit. We had a good chat the other day, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you, for anybody who knows, Travis, you've been doing this 17 years, right?
Yes.
With EXHIBITOR?
Yeah, it's funny because when I started, I thought, gosh, what am I going to be able to write about trade shows every single month? And then I got into it and realized that it's such a multifaceted industry.
Yeah.
And there's so much going on, and you've got sales and marketing, and design, and a little bit of theater, and there is a little bit of theater. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah. So it's been awesome. It's, I had worked a little bit in trade shows before starting at EXHIBITOR, but really had no idea how complex the industry really was. So it's been an awesome gig. I never thought I'd be here 17 years. Let's do 17 more, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I read your stuff, right? I mean, I read it all the time. I think you're a great writer. You really write some really good stuff, thought-provoking stuff, good informational stuff. So that's kind of what I want to drag out of you today. I think for people that are, in events, in trade shows, in the corporate marketing space there, obviously you have really great insights to data, to exhibitors, to convention centers, conversations that you're privy to, which I think is great. One thing I wanted to start with is this is something that we've talked about on this show, and I think it's a very interesting topic, right? Which is that a lot of marketers, and I'm sure there's some on this call that this has happened, where they start working for a company, they're in the marketing department, and all of a sudden somebody walks over to them and throws trade shows on their desk and says, hey, we need you to set up our trade shows. You're the trade show person now. I think it's super tough for people. The learning curve in event marketing is big. And you guys actually have a program, a whole education on it. And we push our customers to go do it, because we're like, hey, you don't just get this education anywhere. Right. And we do find big learning curve. People are thrown trade shows all the time, and there's to do them effectively and really be a great event marketer at trade shows. Takes time, takes resources, and takes knowledge,
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting. I used to love asking marketers, how did you fall into this? Because it is a lot, like what you said, a lot of folks, they were the receptionist, and then somebody resigns and they need somebody to ship the booth out, and all of a sudden they're the trade show marketer, and
they're on it.
Yeah, right. They're like, what do I do?
Yeah.
I think initially, it's just learning the industry and the logistical side of it. And that's a big part of our certification program, and the education that we do is the logistical side of things. But I think really, if you want to be an exhibit marketer, a strategic marketer instead of a logistical exhibit manager who just gets the booth from point A to point B, you really need to study trade shows. You really need to learn about marketing and sales, because what we do at trade shows, it combines a lot of those different, different skills, different talents, but there are these nuances that you only find in trade shows. And that's where I think that we have something that we can offer to exhibit marketers, to trade show professionals, that they really can't find anywhere else. So it's a great opportunity to be involved in the industry and to really provide education that's going to help them do their jobs more efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've always thought is trade shows kind of get this slight when it comes to marketing. They almost don't get treated like marketing. And there's a lot of marketers managing trade show programs who have never done it before, Right. They really can be campaigned. They really can be developed into these big marketing revenue generators if done the right way. All right, so let's jump into, you had a quote recently in something you wrote. I don't have the title of what you wrote, but this quote stood out to me. And it is, quote, understand your audience is ravenously seeking connection. I loved that quote, because I think you were speaking to exhibitors, right? And you're speaking to them saying your audience, your customer, they're ravenously seeking connection at your event. So I just want you to dive a little bit into that and tell me what exactly do you mean, and what can exhibitors do?
Yeah, they are foaming at the mouth for engagement. And it's really an interesting time in face-to-face marketing because, you know, during the pandemic, we went from that fear of missing out because everybody was at these trade shows, so we had to be there, right? Well, then nobody was at trade shows. There was nothing to miss out on. And now as they've started to pick back up again, a lot of people, instead of going, well, we have to be there, are going, do we have to be there? And you have to be there. You have to be a part of the industry conversation. And if you're not there, somebody else is, and they're eating your lunch. What I hear from a lot of exhibit managers is that the conversations that they're having with attendees are more substantive. They're lasting longer.
Yeah.
Folks are spending more time in the exhibit.
We hear the same thing without question.
They want to talk, you know, and it's interesting too, because I used to pre-COVID, I would walk a lot of shows and see attendees who didn't want to engage, especially at shows like CES. You have a lot of kind of introverts on the show floor who just didn't really want it, like, don't make eye contact because then he's going to want to scan my badge, you know?
Yeah.
And I see just the opposite now. I see folks really welcoming that engagement. They want to have those conversations. That's how they're going to develop trust with you. That's how they're going to inform you what they need and what their pain points are. And it's how you're going to suss out, okay, now how can I uniquely help this client? Folks who used to skip out on the welcome reception after they used their 2-drink tickets, you know, and then they would peace out.
Yeah.
Staying for the whole thing because those connections and those conversations are what everybody's been missing for the past 2 years. So really, it's a fantastic time to be in face-to-face marketing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I love the quote because I love the two things. The one thing you said there was on just essentially how the conversations are better, the quality is better, right? Because it's kind of weeded out the crap, you know, because there was a lot of crap at trade shows. There's too many people, too many shoppers, not really shopping, just window shopping, a lot of conversations, badge scanning. Like we have heard that as well from our clients alone, just them saying like, hey, like it's the quality is there. You know, maybe the volume's not, but the quality is. And then on the connection side, I mean, we talked about this prior, like I firmly believe this. With technology has changed trade shows to a degree, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. People still want to get face to face. They want to connect. They want to meet. They want to relate. And trade show is giving you that chance. So take them through the experience and create an experience that builds real connection with your customer.
Definitely. It's interesting too, your note about how even though attendance might be down, the quality is disproportionately high. What I'm seeing also is that as attendance rises, so now you've got a number of shows that maybe held their first post-COVID event in fall of 2021. So this is their second post-COVID event. And the attendance 2022 to 2021 is up in some cases pretty significantly, but the quality still seems to be really high. So it's kind of an interesting thing where, you know, we kind of thought too that as attendance goes down, you're just concentrating the buyers, you're just concentrating on quality. But now to see that even as attendance goes up, that quality is still really high is a really good indicator that folks are coming to attend to trade shows to do business. And fewer of those tire kickers, fewer folks just roaming the halls, and more people looking to have those conversations and to find out what you can do for them.
Yeah, I love that you said fewer tire kickers, right? Because I think that's just, it's just more point to say like, hey, if you're going to go to this trade show, like create real engagement, right? Don't put a pinball machine just because you're like, you want them to play pinball. Like create real engagement where you can connect with them either on, you know, your product, your service, your value to them. I think it really screams for that. Another quote, because people have been on the show know I'm a quote person. It says, and this one's a little sharp, which I like because that's how I like to talk. But if you go into your 2022 trade shows with your 2019 playbook, you're either irrational or lazy. I love that. So we can, you know what we'll do? We'll take it and say 2022 into 2023, but regardless, I think it's a great quote. I think it's super true. I'm big on, you know, we talk with our clients about adjusting, creating campaigns, measuring and moving them and, you know, going to get results. I'd love to know exactly what you mean by that and, you know, just kind of pontificate on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the big thing is we have to acknowledge that things have changed. And not necessarily in the ways that we initially anticipated. I think at the beginning of COVID, we kind of thought, okay, we're going to always be social distancing. So booths are going to have to be bigger, and we're going to have hand sanitizer. And, we're going to do all of these things having to do with actually the contagion. And that has not really held. The exhibits that shifted to accommodate those COVID protocols have kind of shifted back. So that didn't stick, but we do have to acknowledge that things have changed. And if we don't do that, we can't really optimize on the opportunities that we're going to have in 2022 and beyond. And I think that a big part of accepting that things have changed is stop complaining about it. It just is normal. It's the world that we live in. For the time being, attendance is down. Now, I want to make a point that attendance does seem to be increasing. And I think for 2023, it's going to be like significantly less of an issue for exhibit managers. But right now, today, there are fewer people walking the show floor. So let's take that off the table and say, instead of complaining about it, what are we going to do about it? And one of the things, to your point, is know that it's a higher quality audience. Know that you're going into a greater concentration of folks that are really there to buy. And that can impact your strategy in a number of ways. One of them is maybe you should stop going to trade shows with the goal of brand awareness, with that quantity over quality sort of objective. Maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe the approach is really to go in and say, what if we could have face-to-face, one-on-one conversations with our 10 biggest clients and our 10 biggest prospects? Maybe
I love that. I love that differentiation with your goals.
Yeah.
Absolutely great. Yeah, that's good.
Really, really honing in on those 20 people, and everything else you get, that's gravy, but finding ways where that number of leads that you generate at the show, that number of badge scans, isn't the factor which defines success or failure for your program. Because my hunch is that pre-COVID, what you were calling a lead wasn't a lead to begin with, and certainly isn't a lead post-COVID. Just because someone happens to step on your booth carpet and you happen to get that badge scanner close enough to scan their badge, that doesn't mean that they're interested in your products. So I think just rethinking our strategies a little bit to focus on what we're dealing with now, what the environment is now today. And part of that too, I think, is just going to be recalibrating objectives, making sure that we're going into shows, acknowledging to internal stakeholders, attendance is down 10, 20% compared to pre-COVID. So quantitatively, I wouldn't be setting quantitative objectives. I would be setting qualitative objectives. And it's just a little bit of a shift, but it's going to really have an impact on your strategy and how you utilize that opportunity and optimize your investment at the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said some really great stuff there. So the whole thing with the goals, with just this vague brand awareness goal, right? You just scan. That leads me to think like kind of what you said is be more specific. I said, you kind of said like recalibrate your objectives, right? To me, that means like create more intention with what you're doing, right? Be more purposeful with why you're there and who is there. And I urge people on these calls all the time. And sometimes I feel like I sound like a broken record, but I'm just always like, hey, sit down, have these conversations. If you're the event marketer, go get your director of sales, right? Get them for 30 minutes and say, hey, run me through these customers. Let's have a conversation. Who do you talk to? Who sucks? Who's great? Who's ideal? Like you got to really navigate. And then you say, hey, this is the big idea. Like this is the purpose. This is the intention. Let's go make it happen. Like, let's go put a plan together to make it happen.
Right. I mean, there are events that companies go to where 5 to 10% of the attendees are within their target audience. If they don't know that, they're not going to have a successful show. If they do know that, that we're targeting 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 attendees, you go about that in a completely different way. But if you don't know that and you don't go into it eyes wide open, and to your point, being intentional, your strategy is going to be off. If you expect that folks are going to come to you, well, know that for every 20 that come to you, only one of them is actually going to be interested in your products. Only one is going to be in that target audience.
Interesting when you put it in numbers like that, right? It makes you really start thinking about what you're doing.
Exactly. Yep. So
I love that.
I really just think it's level setting, really looking at what are the issues that we need to deal with as exhibit marketers, and then
Mhm.
what can we accomplish. And I really think that there's an opportunity for face-to-face marketers to approach trade shows and events from a much more strategic place than maybe they were in 2019. And I think that's really how we have to look at it, and why I say you can't be using the same playbook, because even if your playbook worked in 2019, world has changed. But my guess is
Yeah.
so many face-to-face marketers didn't have a playbook in 2019.
Mm.
They were kind of
Yeah.
winging
Too
it.
many don't. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is an opportunity, I think, to really rethink the way that we approach face-to-face marketing and make steps that are going to make that investment generate higher returns for us.
I love what you said about the strategic approach, right? Like constantly thinking that way. I mean, you have any examples of maybe like where you would say a person could, create more of a strategic approach? Like you gave a great one when it came to goals and objectives. You're saying like, hey, like this, just creating brand awareness is way too vague. Like be more specific and say, okay, we're going to get in front of the 10 best either customers or prospects, and we're going to set up A, B, and C for them and take them through it. So much more intentional,
Yeah, I mean,
which
I
I
think
love.
the best example is probably, I'm a big believer in pre-show marketing. I feel like if you're not doing any pre-show marketing, you're not really doing your job as an exhibit marketer. At the very least, you should be making sure that your clients know you're going to be there, that your top prospects know you're going to be there.
Yep.
I think that you should be pre-scheduling appointments with them if at all
Oh,
possible.
yeah. Like animals, like animals.
Right.
I mean,
and
yes.
using some of the channels that are available to you, pretty much, I would say most companies have at least one social media channel. Doing some sort of pre-show marketing is really essential. But to give you an example of that shift in thinking, if you go from targeting a brand awareness objective at a show where you believe, probably because you don't know, that everyone is within your target audience, to one where you're looking for, you understand your target audience, you're looking for quality, and that it's, 10, 15, 20% or whatever of the trade show attendees. Your pre-show marketing will be different also, because you might go from, if you're doing any sort of, direct mailers or any sort of targeted marketing to the attendees at the show, instead of targeting the 10,000 people that go there, maybe it makes more sense to invest in a higher quality mailer, in something that's dimensional, but really focus in on those 100 people. The rest of the 10,000, they might stop by, they might have a conversation with you, they might let you scan their badge, they might take one of your branded pens, but they are of no value to you. And I think just going into it, being aware of that and really thinking about, how does our strategy need to change? Maybe we don't have any giveaway items because we recognize that we're going in targeting these top buyers and these top prospects. So maybe that doesn't make any sense to have, because that's just attracting the looky-loos and the folks that are like, ooh, they're neat. Like, what do you guys do? I don't want to talk to that guy. You shouldn't want to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
But so maybe instead of putting the money into, 5,000 branded pens, you're putting them into 20 really nice, personalized, thoughtful giveaways.
I love that. Yeah.
Folks get after they meet with you, So it's just rethinking things you do, anything that you did prior to COVID. It's not that it's wrong, but you need to reevaluate it and think, does it still make sense in 2022 and 2023? Have our objectives shifted? Has our target audience shifted? And how has attendance at the events that we have historically gone to shifted as well? Because you might find that, you had a number of buyers at this show. Maybe they're not going to that show anymore, but maybe you have more buyers going to this other event, so you need to do a little bit of due diligence to find out where your target audience is and then invest accordingly.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think, going back to what you said, like if you go into 2022 trade shows with your 2019 playbook, you're either irrational or lazy. Like that brings me to saying like, very simply, just go be more intentional with what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like hone in on it more. I think from a strategy standpoint, one of the things that I'd say I slowly started to uncover a little bit and have conversations about is differentiating between your customers and your prospects. We have a lot of clients who have customers on the show floor, current customers, people they're already working with, and they tend to forget about them. They tend to forget that they're there. versus all about the prospect and going to get and bring it in. And it's like, whoa, well, hold on a second. Like, we want to build this booth and build your space so that the experience that your customer goes through is different than the experience that your prospect goes through, because they need different things from you, right? What does the conversation with your customer look like, and so forth? But strategy is a good segue here, right? Because what it goes into is this article that you wrote called Bait and Pitch, which I thought was really cool. I'm going to read a little excerpt of this, right? And you were talking about differentiating yourself when I got into this article as a company. And it says, good salespeople are intimately aware of this fact, and they work hard to ensure clients know what makes their product superior to the competition's offerings. Exhibit managers are familiar with the concept of differentiation as well. Your key messages, show daily advertisements, graphic panels, and live presentations are littered with boastful claims of being the best, cheapest, largest, most efficient, etc. And yet, for many marketers, the differentiation stops there. I love that, because one of the things that we talk about on the show, we talk about a lot of the same stuff sometimes, is differentiation on the floor. To me, when you get on the trade show floor, it is an opportunity to differentiate from your competitor. You're across the aisle. A lot of them are there because their competitors are there, and you gotta stand out, right? It's like marketing 101. You got to stand out. You got to attract people. So it's like, how can you get creative? And the bottom part of this that you wrote, it says that you would ask people, what makes your booth better than the one across the aisle? I think it's a great question in the moment. And you said 9 times out of 10, their responses have nothing to do with their exhibits or experiences and everything to do with their products. And I think that is hitting home, that they're missing the point. You're there to deliver an experience. They could find out your product and your service on the website. They could look you up. I mean, we're entering Web 3.0 here. They, they can find out, but the experience is key.
Yeah. And differentiation is really 2 different things. So one is, yes, as a marketer, you need to understand what your key differentiators are for your product, why your product is better than the competitors. And you do need to figure out ways to incorporate those messages into what you're doing from a marketing standpoint. But the other side of the aisle is, as an exhibit marketer or an exhibit manager, your product is actually the exhibit. That's really what you produce personally for your company. And if your product is exactly like what's across the aisle, you're not really doing your job. You need to create a product, an exhibit that has a competitive differentiator. Why should they come and see you? If it's all about your product, then maybe you should just send your product there, experience.
Yeah.
Think about one of the things that I think is troubling, I guess, is when I talk to marketers and I ask, like, okay, so once buyers come here, once they're in your booth, then what happens? And they're like, well, then we ask them about their needs and scan their badge and have a conversation. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what the guy across the aisle is doing too. Really think about what the in-booth experience is going to be. Find ways to make it memorable, to make it personal. That's how you're going to stand out. That's how you're going to differentiate yourself. And sometimes your booth staff can be your differentiator. There are a lot of bad booth staffers on the show floor. And a lot of folks that are dismissive, that are introverted, that don't want to engage with you.
On their phone, food laying around. Yeah, I've seen it.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've, engaged with a booth staffer because I'm interested in what their exhibit is or what's going on in their space. But then I stay because they're just cool to talk to.
Interesting people.
Just a good conversation to have. And your buyers are humans too. They're going to have that same perspective. And what is nice about that also is you're not just holding those people's attention longer, which is giving you the opportunity to convey your key messages and everything, but you're also doing the exact thing that generates trust in a booth, is those conversations, not hard selling them, but having an open conversation, a back and forth dialogue about, what's going on in the industry, what are their pain points, what are their challenges, and then the sale comes on the back end, not on the front end. And it really goes back to that whole idea that your clients are seeking engagement. They want the engagement. Yes, of course, when they enter a trade show floor and they come into your booth, they know that they're going to get a sales pitch. But if you put the sales pitch on the back end instead of on the front end, you're going to get more honesty, more openness from them. And then you're going to be able to customize your pitch to what it is that they're dealing with and what their pain points and needs are. One of the things that I think is really important and is a really key differentiator between 2019 and 2022, 2023 is I've been encouraging people to really design their booth, think about their experience, and train their booth staff for engagement, and specifically casual engagement.
Yeah.
So yes, of course, if you've got a big space and you're signing contracts in the booth, you might still need that in-booth conference room. But like, think about, like, nobody's in conference rooms anymore.
Yeah,
Nobody's having those formal conversations. We're doing things on Zoom. We're communicating via Slack and text messaging and everything. And I think that's one of the things that the trade show industry needs to do, is to just chill out a little bit. And you can facilitate that a number of different ways in your booth. I was just at a show where an exhibitor redesigned their booth space to be a little bit like a coffee house, and they were serving cold brew, and it was
I like that. Yeah.
chill. It was just a really chill environment. And the CEO of the company was like leaning against the reception desk, like very casually. And as people approached the booth, I saw their body language change to match his. And they were having very chill, substantive conversations. I mean, they were doing serious business, but they were being more open with one another than they would be if they just shut themselves in this tiny little room. And what I'm seeing too, in terms of furnishings in booth space, which are way more strategic than you might give them credit.
Yeah, they are. Yep, they are.
Fewer of those standard table and 4 chairs, and a lot more high top tables with no chairs. Maybe you swap it out for a sofa. The idea is really to invite more casual connection, that people come into the booth and instead of having a transaction with you, they're having a conversation with you.
Yeah.
And if you can think about it that way, I really think that you're going to maximize what is uniquely valuable about face-to-face marketing. And that's that relationship building, that connection that you can't really do over Zoom. And giving you the
ability. That furniture sets the stage for it, for sure. Yep.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, we used to tell people, that furniture was strategic in the sense of like, if you want people to come and stay in your booth, put a comfortable chair. If you don't, put an uncomfortable chair. If it's just there, for somebody to use real quickly, but you don't want, somebody camping out there for an hour. It's way, way deeper than that. And again, it's one part of your exhibit that you just need to rethink. Don't just check the box on, yes, renting, round table for folding chairs, whatever. Think about, is that what we're doing in the booth? And do we want to turn our booth into a conference room? It might not make sense anymore.
No, it's a great point to rethink the furniture and just kind of the way that you lay those things out. Like, as you were talking, I took a couple of notes here and I was just thinking to myself, one is on the booth staff, right? I have this friend of mine. He created a product. He goes to one trade show a year. He sells it at the trade show and he brings another friend of ours. That friend does not work for him. He has a completely different job. He brings him because he's the most gregarious guy in the room at all times. And he just goes to the show floor with him. He pays him for a couple of days and he sells a ton of this stuff. So what you were saying about knowing your booth staff, who's in the booth staff, it can be a differentiator. There are a lot of Debbie Downers at these exhibits and they don't help drive your space. Another example I think of is when you're talking about differentiation and being on the trade show floor with your competitor in your aisle or near. I think about like restaurants, right? I live in Jacksonville and there are like 2 kind of like taco places, margarita places that are near each other. One has way better food, right? Than the other one. But the other one that doesn't have the better food packs out all the time. It's because of the ambiance, the building, the outdoor, the layout, the vibe. And it's like, you can't surpass that experience on people, hotels, restaurants, trade shows, that experience to people. It draws them, it attracts them. They want to be in that experience. Right. So you have to consider that when you were saying going product to product, like, great, they can do all the research on your product in the world.
Exactly.
But what kind of experience are you going to deliver them to kind of keep them enthralled and engage them? You have to be, you have to be thinking that way.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think too many exhibit managers go to their exhibit houses and they say, okay, I want a 10 by 20 foot booth with a reception desk and, some locking storage. And they're thinking about the requirements and sometimes about what they want it to look like. where they should start that conversation is how they want attendees to feel in that space. And probably the second step is, what do you want to communicate to them? What do you want them to remember when they leave?
I love both of those. Love both of those.
Grow off of that. I mean, to your point earlier about competition and differentiators, one example stands out to me, and I love it. It's actually from the first show that I ever attended for Exhibitor. It was Print 2005 in Chicago. So it's getting old, but it stuck with me all these years because it was so simple and it was so smart. So at Print, a lot of the exhibitors they have printers and large format printers that do graphics and signage and everything. And they said they believed they had the fastest printer on the market. And so their giveaway was a branded stopwatch. And they said, now take this to all of our competitors and time their machine.
Yeah.
Then come back and buy ours. Yeah, and it was it was so smart. I almost didn't even need to go time the other printers.
No, you don't.
So bold. And
I love that.
It was that, you should believe what I'm saying in the booth and the demo that's running here. But if you don't, you go check it out.
You can go ahead yourself. And what I love about what you're saying with that example, for people doing this, I think that is such a marketing tactic. It's thinking like a marketer. And it amazes me, because we deal with the event marketer, the people running trade shows. And it's like they get into this trade show mode, this lane that they have to do this. And they all of a sudden don't think like a marketer. They think like, I got to get this trade show booth up. I got to get this trade show booth up. And it's like, I mean, even as so much as when we're getting into conversations about the graphics and the branding on a booth, I mean, you can ruin a trade show booth with poor graphics, and graphics can make a trade show booth with what you're saying, what you said, what you're communicating, the way you lay it out, the way you have to think like a marketer. How are you going to market yourself at these trade shows? And I would really love to see more of that on the trade show floor. I think you're starting to see it. You're starting to see more. I think it's vital. I think it's absolutely vital for trade shows and for people exhibiting.
I think so too. We just need to up our game across the board. And part of that is, I always go back to experience and creating an experience in the booth. Now, I think a lot of people assume when I say experience, they're like, I don't want to play a game in the booth. I don't want to, have cornhole in my exhibit. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. You can have a really good experience with cornhole, but it's about creating an environment. It's about creating something that is more than just a surface level conversation. A conversation and a personal exchange can be experiential. You can do that. You don't need to think way outside of the box to accomplish this. And the other thing I think too is to really think about your exhibits. We used to say that we, design exhibits like a billboard on the highway. And there are still some truisms from billboard design that make sense. High contrast, absolutely. Making sure that the font is big enough to read, all of those things, those graphics.
What's your message too? I mean, what are you going to say? You got 3 seconds. What's the one thing you want me to know?
Exactly. But it's, when we think about trying to design for engagement, it isn't really just that billboard principle anymore. There's a lot more to it. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is using your space, using your graphics to elicit a question or to facilitate engagement. As I mentioned before, one really good example that I just saw last week at a show in Anaheim was a company that works in the reproductive medicine industry. And it was a very simple booth. It was their first time at the show, but they had a wall hung on the wall were a bunch of clear, like vinyl bags, branded bags. And that was their giveaway too. And above that, it said, in this business, transparency is key. And I was like, ooh, it's so smart, so simple. But it also, okay, well, tell me more about that. It elicits a conversation, or at the very least, it provides a staffer with a conversation starter that they can reference. They can use your exhibit then almost like a series of props to facilitate that engagement. And then on the other side of the booth, they had this visual metaphor that worked just as well. So every space, in this little 10 by 20 foot booth was working and facilitated that engagement. And staffers, if you had anyone who was introverted or who didn't know what to say to an attendee when they walk up, the booth actually facilitates that and gives them a little bit of a crutch. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think most people are worried about that when they're staffed in, like you said, it gives them the crutch. They are worried about what are they going to say? What's going to happen? What's the communication going to be like? What am I going to do with them? One of the things I think that we're kind of describing and just hovering around here that, we tell our customers sometimes is like, these pop-up shops that brands do nowadays they're so big, right? I think we talked about the one, it was like Bumble had one in Manhattan. They spent like $500,000 or more on this pop-up shop for like a week. And it's like, there's no difference between that and a trade show booth. There's not a difference, but for some reason, like think like a pop-up shop. You're going to put this campaign, right. You're going to do this build out. You got to get people there. You got to draw them in. You got to take them through. You can't have a pop-up shop with just a structure and be like, hey, we're Bumble. Right. People are walking down the street like, what the hell is this? So you have to think that way with your trade show booth rather than the conventional, oh yeah, let's get the booth up. We need 4 demo stands. We'll send Jane and Devin down there, and yeah, they'll crush it. It's like, right. No, you could be so great at this. It's like you just got to do more.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I feel like there has been historically this perception that B2B is serious and it's in booth meeting and it's
got to be more fun. You're right. Yes,
here's my business card. Yeah, your buyers are consumers too,
that's a good point.
And whether they're signing a multi-million-dollar contract with you or they're buying, a pack of gum, they're still consumers, and they still respond to the same things. Now, granted, if we're talking about multi-million-dollar contracts, you've got to have a lot of substance there as well.
Yes.
But the tactics that consumer marketers use to attract folks to those pop-up stores, to attract attendees at exhibits, consumer trade shows, those work in B2B too. Nothing in B2B would probably work in B2C. To be honest, everything in B2C works at least to some degree in B2B. And, so I think we all need to allow ourselves to have a little bit more fun. The face-to-face marketing industry, I tell writers when I bring them in, I say, this is a fun industry. And if you're not having fun, it isn't my fault. It's either yours or you just haven't found the piece of it that's really interesting. And trade shows should be fun too.
I agree.
Yes, there's business being done, but it should be fun. It should be an experience. It should be, the sort of thing where folks who didn't get to go to the show look at, the social media posts and the photos that are coming out of the show and hear about the sessions, and they're like, ugh, wish I could have been there. If
you shouldn't be waiting for happy hour. You shouldn't be waiting to go out afterward. Yeah. That's great. Don't get me wrong. I partake in all that and it's a blast and I've done it, but like what you're saying, it should be there. It should be more fun. And I know firsthand, like that resonates so hard with me because we've had conversations with our clients and it's like, some of the companies have so much red tape. They can't get out of their own way. And I would push marketers on this call, like be a thought leader at your company, right? Go to your executives and talk to them about differentiation. Talk to them about, standing out, attracting customers. How we've done it in the past is not the way we want to do it moving forward. Be a high level thinker, right? And bring that there. I mean, that's, as Pablo says, that is the train to Promotion Town, which I think is great, but also it shows you as that bigger thinker and create some fun, create some buzz, do something different that your competitor is going to be like, man, we should have done that. They're killing it. They're killing it over there.
Yeah. I mean, be bold, try things that your competitors would never do. And don't be afraid to come with a presence that is surprising to people.
Yes.
A lot of companies, their attendees, their clients know them. They have a certain perception of what they're going to look like when they go to the show. Don't be afraid to break that. Because if nothing else, it's going to attract attention. And sometimes just attracting that attention is half the battle at trade shows.
Without a doubt.
So think about that. And another option, I guess, for folks, if they're working with managers who are afraid to push the envelope and to do something a little bit more outside the box, is pick a small show that maybe it's your least performing event and use that as a beta test. Don't go all out and build out your 40 by 40, as a bouncy house, but, maybe, there are ways to take some of the elements, some of the things that are outside of the box and put them into a 10 by 10 or a 10 by 20 there.
Yeah.
Track your metrics and talk with attendees like, yeah, this is a little different for us. What do you think? You might find that they love it. And sometimes having that data or that anecdotal response, everybody that I talked to in the booth, all of our clients were having a great time. Having photos of like your clients in the booth playing that game and smiling, laughing.
Fun. Having
that and be able to bring it to that manager and be like, yeah, this actually, is successful.
Works.
It does work. And maybe, again, you don't want to completely reimagine, that 40 by 40 at your tier 1 show, but maybe you can add some whimsy and some fun and some engagement and experience into that booth that you maybe thought was outside of parameters before.
I mean, you can roll stuff into it. I mean, anybody listening, those are great points, right? I mean, those are just excellent points. And I love what you said, talk to the attendees. I feel like too many exhibitors don't get that feedback in the moment. So if you're going to try something, if you're going to do something, first of all, they don't all work, right? We've done things with our clients that it doesn't work, right? I mean, it just doesn't. We've done stuff with our clients that they're like, that was incredible. But always like talk to your attendee, ask them, say, hey, we're trying this is new. What do you think about this? Like, is this, you know what I mean? Like, how do you feel? And they'll kind of let you know, you know what I mean? They'll give you that feedback. And I think it goes back to initially what we talked about in your quote is that going year to year, you got to be able to make adjustments. It's trade show marketing. It's not the trade show. It's trade show marketing. So it needs to evolve and you need to get better and better and better. And it only comes from getting feedback on that stuff. It really does.
And, talking with attendees too can give you so much more insight than just even what you're doing from a marketing perspective. When I talked earlier about recalibrating your objectives, another piece of that is diversifying your objectives. So don't just look at lead counts. Let's pull in some other metrics, some other things that are important to us. How many of our top 10 clients did we meet with? How many new prospects did we meet with? Did we generate any press exposure? But also, is there something you can learn from attendees that's going to derive value for your program? If you can be doing a tiny bit of market research, perhaps, maybe you've got some sort of a survey that people fill out when they come into the booth or something, where you can say, even if it's just, hey, what would be more important to you with our products, to make them cheaper or to make them better? Even that is really interesting. It can drive R&D efforts, can help you make informed decisions moving forward. And that's something, again, it's something that a lot of exhibit managers don't think about, but it's just one additional layer of value that you can bring back to your company and prove, the importance of face-to-face marketing and the importance of your program.
Yeah. I love the bringing back stuff, talking to people, getting that feedback. I think is vital here. You have another article you wrote. Again, you're a writer. So that's why, I got these loaded up. Oh yeah. There's some articles in there. One called Model Behavior. I like this one because again, it's a piece of what I've spoken about and written about is, we did a show on RFPs on if you're an event marketer, how do you create an RFP to send to me? I mean, I've looked at however many, and I had one of my senior account executives on, and we're like, hey, we see so many that are wrong. And I was trying to show people like, hey, by creating a bad RFP, by not going through the process and not qualifying us well, you're going to miss out on the best companies. And there's some great companies in our space. There's some average companies and there's some absolute crap companies. So you got to know who you're working with. And
the good ones are so busy right now that if they come across a bad RFP, they're just not even going to respond. And
gone. They chuck it. Yeah. Exactly. And this quote thing in here, from your article kind of touches on all of it. It says, several months ago, I toured an exhibit with the Space's designer in tow. The structure was impressive, but what really wowed me was his impassioned explanation of the initial spark that grew into the design's central concept. His extraordinarily well thought out idea had been developed and nurtured for weeks before a single rendering was created. Many of the most memorable exhibits I've seen in the past decade possessed a soulful depth of character born out of a deeply rooted concept from which the design and its subsequent details flowed. But that kind of brilliance can't be reverse engineered into an exhibit that's designed in 90 minutes. That is a great, the concept of sketching, conceptualizing, that comes from talking about the customer. That comes from talking about your intent. If you got someone that's just saying, hey, I'll get you a sketch tomorrow. Where do you want the demo stand? Where do you want this? all that's important, but like, we'll get there. We need to talk about your customer. We need to talk about your why. We need to talk what you said. What do you want your customer to feel when you walk into that exhibit? And that is where that, sort of derives from, which is great.
Yeah. And there are a couple of things. I mean, some background on that piece. It's really, the piece is really about how fundamentally design changed in the exhibit industry with the advent of, being able to create a digital rendering. So
how quickly you could render and put pieces together. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Versus, back in the day when folks built 3D models of exhibits, that was the rendering. And the whole idea is, if you're going to spend hours and hours and hours and a lot of money creating this model, this 3D model, you had to get the concept right. Now that we have, these digital rendering software, you can move stuff around. It's easy. You don't have to get it right the first time. And from an iterative perspective, that's wonderful. What happened, though, is somewhere along the line, the concept and the soul of an exhibit, the backstory of it that gives it that richness.
Yes. The story
of the equation. Yeah.
Yes.
And what was so interesting about the exhibit that's referenced in that piece is part of the process was the designer brought the exhibit manager out into a forest and created this whole environment. Wow. And here's the bottom line that you do need to take away from this is, did any attendees walking up to that exhibit go, ooh, I bet this is built on a barn that was in a forest? And no, they're not gonna know that unless you tell them. And that's not the important part. The important part is that having a concept and a backstory, for one, it's going to make you way more strategic because you are going to be thinking about, how do we want the attendee to feel? Second, it does add a richness of experience to the space. And you will sense this. I mean, if you go to shows and you spend a little bit of time in an exhibit that was designed in 90 minutes and put together and looks like a whole lot of the other exhibits on the trade show floor, it's
parody.
Yeah, it is.
Parody.
But if you go into a really well-crafted exhibit with a concept where the concept drove the design instead of vice versa, there's a soulfulness. It is the best way I can describe it to the space that you won't necessarily know why it's there or how they did it. That is the difference, is having that kind of soulful concept where the design has been considered and created, not just rendered. And I think that's the thing. And to your point about RFPs and RFIs, that is something that you should be looking for. If there are two types of transactions. So if you're issuing an RFP and you are looking for a transactional relationship, you need a 10 by 20 foot booth that fits into this size of crate and whatever. That's transactional. Maybe you aren't looking for a long-term partnership. If you are looking for a strategic partnership, an exhibit house that's going to not just build your booth, but actually add value to your program, you need to be looking for the exhibit houses that think about things that way, that want to understand your customer before they know how many meeting rooms you need.
What's their process?
Exactly.
What's their process? I've said all the time, you're going to know if you select 3 through research and whatever it is, referrals, however you do it, take them. You should be able to differentiate us, people like my company, through their process. And I tell you what, right now, the company that gives you the design first, kick them to the curb. Right. Like, they should go to the curb the fastest without question. And I love what you said, the concept drove the design. That is a great quote. I don't know if you've ever said it before, but it's a great quote, because it should. And you can feel that authenticity would be the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Authenticity.
The designer should be able to talk about the design, but also why that design is right for you and what their motivation was in doing this or that. And you should be asking those questions, especially if this is an in-person presentation where they're going through a concept for you. You should be asking those questions, because you're going to find out how that designer thinks and how much thought they really put into different elements and different decisions. And you want that designer who has thought intimately about your program, your challenges, your target audience, and then giving you a design that is born out of all of that. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah. You wrote, the last piece on this was, whittle down your list of exhibit houses by first asking them to explain their initial concepts without rendering. Select those concepts that give you goosebumps or that indicate a level of thoughtfulness about the uninspired average, and then move on to the renderings. By doing so, you create a prerequisite of contemplation that will net you a more remarkable design as well as a more remarkable designer. Yeah. It's a great way of putting it. It's true. Like you have to get someone that wants to buy into you, your brand, your product, your service, your customer, and say, hey, let's put this together and put it on the show floor the right way. And what you said, as a concept, because you know, you can feel the parody of trade show booths. You're just like, okay, you know, you kind of all look, it's like when Microsoft copied the Apple Store, it didn't work. It didn't work. So Microsoft Store should have looked, I mean, bananas. I mean, totally different compared to Apple Store. Instead, it was a copy of it. It was a clone. So it's like, be you, be uniquely you, concept for you. Make sure it lines up that way. You know?
Figure out what's unique about your products, but also your ethos, your personality, you know, what makes doing business with your company.
Ethos, good word. Yeah.
And your competitors. And you can a lot of times build that or infuse that into your in-booth experience in ways that is going to communicate far louder than any graphic.
I agree.
Because again, it focuses on how people are going to feel when they're in your space.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk briefly on this piece here, because I think it's important, is like staff. We touched on it, planning and kind of show floor execution. I'm a big believer in, we try to tell, you know, the event marketers that we work with and people running trade shows that like, hey, it's not about just getting this thing to the show and making sure it looks good. Like that's our job. That's what you pay us for. You know what I mean? We're going to make sure it all comes together, but it's about kind of running it like the general. You know, you got to get sales on your train. You know, you got to get the team of people going on your train. You got to have morning meetings. You got to have post meetings. You got to have a plan that you're executing, you know? So what are some tips, some things that you've seen that you think could help event marketers, you know, maybe pre, during, and after?
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that's really important, I hear a lot of exhibit managers say, well, I don't get to pick who staffs my booth. Well, that's a problem. That's not an excuse.
That's a problem.
You know, it's super easy to proactively make excuses and say, well, I can't do that because my boss would never let me do that. No, your boss hasn't let you do that yet. And maybe that's because you pitched it in the wrong way. So try something else, try a different approach. If you're really in a position where you don't have the ultimate say as to at least the majority of you know, who's going to staff your exhibit, you know, you need to be tracking performance at trade shows. It's really easy to do. And you can come back and say, you know, so-and-so consistently underperforms. And that data can help make decisions, especially at a time now they're just being a lot more responsible about their travel spend. So a lot of exhibit managers are sending fewer staffers to the booth to begin with. So if you used to have 6 and now you have 4, every one of those 4 better be delivering. One of the things that I think is a really interesting approach, it's an old booth staff trainer told me that he figured out how much money, he took the total show investment and divided it by the number of show hours, and then divided it by the number of staffers, and then got that amount in cash. This is the theater. This is the theater part. Drop that cash on the table and said, this is what it costs the company every hour to have you at that event.
Love that.
The communication isn't, hey, it's really expensive. It is expensive to be at a trade show. That's not what you're conveying. What you're conveying is, this is the value that you need to generate. If you take a 15-minute break every hour, that's 25% of our investment in you being at that show, of choosing.
We need you working. We need you working.
Exactly. And if folks aren't, you need to own your program, and you need to be doing everything that you can to control who it is that's staffing your exhibit. That's number 1. Number 2 is make sure you're training them. And if you're not capable of training them, if that's not your forte, hire a booth staff trainer. You can try it at one specific show and track the engagement that you have with attendees, and you're going to see a significant difference. If you don't, try a different booth staff trainer. Maybe it just wasn't the right fit for your staff. But I really, truly believe it's one of the biggest ROI line items that you can have in your program is hiring a booth staff trainer if you're not comfortable doing it. And the other piece of it, I think, is, to your point, you know, train them before the show. Yes, of course. do that in-booth pep rally the hour before the trade show opens, but then make sure you're meeting with your team at the end of each day or throughout the day, touching base with them to find out what's working, what's not working. What are the most challenging questions that you're getting from attendees? How are they responding to these messages that are our key messages at this event? You can course correct on the fly. You might discover something that you didn't know was happening. And there might even be just simple things like staffers are saying, you know what, it's hard for us to get people to come back to the reception desk to scan their badge after they've gone through the exhibit or whatever. Maybe you need to get a second badge scanner and you put it at the end of the experience.
And that's so simple. That's so simple. But if you don't,
but it's all about optimizing the experience and doing whatever it is that you can in your power. You have a window of opportunity to engage with your target audience, doing whatever you can to make sure that as much of that time is optimized as possible.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great. Like I said, I think one of the other things I would add into there is like this organization of a message. Right. It's kind of like having a plan. Like you're the bus driver. It's your trade show program, your event. So have your messages, have your talking points, have your experience that you're kind of taking people through. Make sure everybody knows how to do it. Make sure everybody's on the same page. And you're the one that runs that. It's your program. Take control of it. Don't let people show up and slump around. And it's your program. Like you said, take ownership of your program and go get results and bring them back to the CMO, bring them back to the VP of marketing, bring them back to the CEO, like go show them like, hey, look, like I'm working my ass off. I'm fighting for us to go get results on our spend. And I'm going to make it better and better and better and better. And part of that is being, I always say, you're the general out there.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think that we need to revisit a little bit in 2022, 2023 is to make sure that everybody is treating this as a career and not a job. And the difference is if it's a job, you're just checking the boxes. You're just doing what you need to get by. And after 2 years of COVID, I don't fault anyone for feeling like they're stuck in that because it was pretty soul sucking, right? Especially for folks in our industry. A career, you stay up on trends. You read everything that you can. You're taking continuing education courses. You're paying attention to how the industry is evolving. And to your point earlier, you're being intentional. And folks think that that's a difficult thing. It's daunting to be intentional, to be mindful. It isn't. Actions with intent are inherently intentional. All you all you have to do is look at each piece of your product and ask yourself, or of your program, and ask yourself why. Why do we do this? If you have a reason, then that's intentional. If you don't have a reason, it's not intentional, and you should probably consider replacing it. And it goes to every piece of your program, all the way down, like I said, to that furniture. Does it make sense to just keep renting this? You know what? We didn't really use that space. So maybe we can do something different with that, 5x5, area.
Rather than saying we do this every year. It's like, well, okay. I mean, what does that really mean?
Think about everything.
I like that.
And if at all possible, tie it back to your objectives, to your goals, or your messaging at the show.
I like it. I like to be mindful of people's time. We're hitting up on an hour here. We've had some shows hit right on the hour. We've had some shows run about 10, 15 long. We still have the bulk of people on here. I want to close with something. I think like 2023 is coming up, right? People are preparing for their trade shows. What would you tell people would be important for them to focus on, or maybe some trends for them to look into and maybe apply themselves, either or?
Sure. The first thing that I think you need to do is take a step back and look at your program and eliminate anything that buyers can already find or can already do on your website. If you can do something virtually or online or via email, do it. And then use face-to-face marketing to do what those mediums cannot do, to focus on the connections, the engagement, the experience, trust building, all of those things. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. Just take a step back, look at what you're doing and go, does this make sense? We probably don't need to have all of our product specs on the back wall. We can take those off. And then by taking them off, it gives us all of this real estate to do a visual metaphor or to create something that's going to facilitate the engagement in the booth.
Love the visual metaphor idea. Right. That's a great idea for people out there.
Another thing too is to really build wisely. So a lot of folks are building booths right now because they maybe were planning to do a new build in 2020 or 2021 or early 2022. And now all of a sudden industry's coming back and folks are going, yeah, let's greenlight that new build. We need it. Mm-hmm. Build wisely. So we used to encourage people, if you have a 40 by 40 exhibit at a show, build the 40 by 40, but make sure it's modular so that it can also work as a 20 by 20.
Yeah.
Now, I think, just to be fiscally responsible, if you have 40 by 40 at one show, build the 20 by 20. And then make sure while you're designing the 20 by 20, your exhibit house knows we have this one-off event where we have a 40 by 40. So we need an exhibit we can reconfigure and then rent the components that we don't need for the 20 by 20, rent that for the 40 by 40. I think you can get a lot more bang for your buck that way. And you're not storing elements that you're only using once a year at your key show. It's a way that you can make your budget go further and then make sure 20 by 20, reinvest the money that you would have spent on purchasing some of those.
Is rocking. Yep.
Put that into the booth. Talk to your exhibit houses about custom financing options. That's something that's relatively new, and most exhibit houses are already doing some degree of that. So think about that. And in some cases, to use that 40 by 40, 20 by 20, it may make more sense for you to build two identical 20 by 20s than one 40 by 40, because a lot of folks are going to more shows or planning to go to more shows in 2023 than they even did in 2019. So look at your schedule, see what makes sense, but it may make sense for you to have two 20 by 20s, store one on the West Coast, store one on the East Coast, and those 20 by 20s are freaking amazing. And you don't need to focus on that 40 by 40. I just think being really smart about what you're building and while you're building it is important.
Those are good.
Like I said earlier, design your booth, train your staff, and tailor your experience to facilitate casual engagement. Really think about whether you're doing that or not. You might actually have stuff going on in your booth now that inhibits casual engagement. So at the very least, identify those things and get rid of them. But ideally, you're taking it a step further and saying, how can we enhance that atmosphere?
I like that. I like what we said about the renting piece too, because purchasing exhibits is very permanent, very expensive, storage, maintenance, everything. Renting really affords a ton of flexibility. And, nowadays you can rent, I don't know the difference on the show floor between a purchase booth and a rental booth. So that flexibility in there is, I think, vital for a really good trade show marketing sort of program, right?
Well, we are entering this weird environment, where trade shows are coming back, and that's awesome. We're keeping an eye on inflation. We're hearing the word recession said more often than I would like it to be said.
Me too.
The last thing that I would leave you with, and this is kind of a two-part thing. First is, if that is a concern in your company, that rental strategy really does give you the flexibility. You're not tied into the cost of ownership and the storage, all of those associated fees that, especially if you have never owned an exhibit before, you don't even see coming, So
you give a budget and you go. That's it when you rent. It's a budget and you go and you're done. Yep, I like that.
But the other piece of this is a challenge to you as a marketer, as an exhibit manager, and that is, as we enter these times of potential recession, of inflation, it causes a lot of companies to make knee-jerk reactions. And one of the first things usually to go is marketing. For one reason or another, what we know now from the pandemic is that companies that maintained their marketing spend throughout the pandemic recovered sooner than companies that cut their marketing. And they're now doing better. They've acquired market share. Use those examples, use that data to make sure that your company doesn't fall victim to that mentality. It is the number one thing that I will give to you as a challenge, is make sure that you're ready to have those conversations. Be preparing now, not necessarily for 2023, but just always be preparing to be called into that CMO's office and have them say, we need to cut your budget. You should always have something in your back pocket to be able to say, no, we shouldn't, and here's why.
Results, measurement, having a real grip on your program in that sense. Like, we have exhibitors and clients of ours, and they don't know if they get results, and that's, that's their choice. That's okay. Right. They go out and they do a good job. We have some that absolutely crush, and they're bringing in serious ROI. I think one thing I would add into this for everybody, and I really appreciate everyone who's hanging around. I hope this is great. My big thing for right now is think like a marketer and think with the word campaign. Don't just do a trade show booth, right? Create it as a campaign. 1 show, 2 show, 3 show, 4 show, 5, whatever it is. Think like in the terms of a campaign. You've created campaigns and other stuff, whether they're ads, campaigns, whatever it is in marketing. Make your trade shows campaign-ish. I would put the ish on the backside of it, right? It means extending the life of the show in the beginning and after, and treating it like a campaign. That is what I would. I love the idea of challenging marketers. I would challenge marketers that are on this and who will be listening to this to treat your trade show or trade shows like a campaign.
Yeah. And really also, during the pandemic, exhibit houses had to pivot. They picked up new skill sets by bringing new people on to do things that they maybe hadn't done before. Revisit your exhibit house, because you're going to find out that it can do a whole lot more for you than deliver an exhibit.
Than it used to be able to. Yeah,
exactly,
I agree.
Exactly. And, there are efficiencies of scale. There are all of these things, consistency of messaging. You don't need to bring an agency up to speed on your company because you've been working with this exhibit house. Really explore, what else can you do for me? That's a great question to ask. What else can you do for me and my program? And I think you're going to find that there are a lot more options than you realize.
That's an interesting thing to say to ask people like us what we can do. Cause I always, just from like my personal plight, is like, I always get caught up like, trade show is, I would say, is our bread and butter, but like we do design and build branded environments, right? We do brand activations. We do, we have, there's a whole skills. I mean, we're building a plaza right now at an arena. Like, I mean, there's so much stuff that we do, but it's almost like you got to stick with what you're good at. And you don't want to tell everybody like, oh man, we're great at everything. But that is a great point. Like myself and a lot of our competitors, non-competitors, whoever that, really great at a lot of cool stuff. And you can leverage their design capabilities, their strategic capabilities. It's a really good point to make. Travis, this was a blast. You are a wealth of knowledge. Okay. I really appreciated a lot of things you say. I took my own notes here on some of the stuff that you said and scribbles, because I think I can make more content and shows from it, because there's some really good stuff in here. For everybody that hung on and stayed with us, thank you. Hope you guys enjoyed this show. Travis, I hope you enjoyed it, and I appreciate the conversation. It was great.
Yeah, great time, great conversation, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. This is Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Thank you guys who are on here, right, for showing up again, and appreciate it. Travis, thank you again. You were awesome, man. It was great.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye, everybody.